I never thought I would be the guy who gets cheated on. My name is Jake, and I'd like to think I'm a decent husband. I'm 35, married to Rebecca, who's 33 for nearly a decade now. We've had our ups and downs like any couple, but I always believed we were solid. We even sought counseling when things got rocky a couple of years ago. That's when we met our counselor, Dr. Collins. He was supposed to help us, but he ended up becoming a part of the worst chapter of my life. It all started a few months ago. Rebecca had been acting strange. She was more distant, spending late nights working on projects at her job, or so she said. I remember the first time I noticed a shift. We were watching a movie, and instead of cuddling up like we usually did, she was glued to her phone. I brushed it off, thinking she was just wrapped up in whatever social media drama was trending at the moment. But then I started noticing the little things. Her sudden interest in gym classes, the new perfume she wore, and the fact that she seemed less interested in our intimate life. One night after another of her meetings, I decided to check her phone while she was in the shower. I know privacy invasion, but something didn't sit right with me. That's when I saw it, a series of flirty texts between her and Dr. Collins. My heart dropped. They were talking about getting together later and how much fun they had at dinner. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The anger bubbled up inside me, but I put the phone back down and waited for her to come out of the shower. When she walked into the living room, I confronted her. Her eyes went wide and I could see the panic flashing across her face. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, but I wasn't having it. I pulled out my phone and read the messages aloud. Her face turned pale. "Jake, I can explain," she said, her voice trembling. She began to spin a web of lies, claiming it was harmless flirting and that she was just confused about her feelings. I couldn't believe it. She had betrayed my trust with the person who was supposed to help us. I didn't shout or throw things, though I wanted to. I just stood there, feeling the weight of her betrayal crashing down on me. I thought of all the times we had talked about our dreams and future. Rebecca had always been the one who wanted to work things out. Yet here she was, throwing it all away for someone who had manipulated our trust. I felt a mix of emotions: shock, anger, sadness, and a deep-seated sense of betrayal. It was as if the ground beneath me had shifted and I was left standing on shaky ground. I wanted to scream, cry, and throw up all at the same time. Instead, I took a deep breath and asked her if she even cared about our marriage anymore. Her response was chilling. "Jake, I just need to figure out what I want. You don't understand." That was it for me. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by someone who didn't see the damage she was causing. I spent the night wrestling with my thoughts. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every argument and every moment of intimacy, wondering when things had started to fall apart. It felt like a nightmare. I had always believed in the sanctity of marriage and loyalty, and here she was throwing it all away. After what felt like an eternity, I made a decision. I was done letting her play with my emotions. I didn't know what was next, but I knew I had to protect myself. I would not be the victim in this situation. I would take control. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of my journey toward revenge. I needed to devise a plan, one that would not only protect my interests but also show Rebecca the consequences of her actions. The next chapter would be about taking back my life. The days that followed my confrontation with Rebecca were a whirlwind of emotions. I felt like I was navigating through a dense fog, unsure of where I was headed but knowing I needed to move forward. I stopped trying to talk to her, and instead I focused on gathering myself. I needed a plan. I didn't want pity, I wanted justice, and I was determined to ensure she felt the consequences of her betrayal. I started doing some digging. I knew the counseling sessions were a big part of what had happened, so I decided to confront Dr. Collins. I scheduled an appointment under the pretense of wanting to continue our sessions. When I arrived at his office, I felt a mix of nerves and anger. This was the man who had betrayed my trust, and I needed to hold him accountable. As I walked into the office, Dr. Collins greeted me with an overly friendly smile, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I sat down across from him, feeling a concoction of rage and betrayal boiling just beneath the surface. I played it cool at first, discussing my feelings about the sessions and how I thought they had helped me gain some perspective. He seemed pleased, nodding along as if he were the architect of my newfound clarity. But then I shifted the conversation. "You know, I've been having some issues with Rebecca lately," I said, watching his expression change slightly. "It seems she got a little too close to you while we were in counseling. Care to explain that?" The smile faltered as he realized where this was heading. "I think there may be a misunderstanding." "Jake," he stammered. I watched as the confident facade he had worn crumbled in real time. "Therapy can be challenging and sometimes emotions get tangled." I leaned in, holding his gaze. "It's not just emotions, Dr. Collins, it's betrayal. You broke the code of ethics by having an affair with my wife. You're supposed to help couples, not destroy them." I saw the color drain from his face. I could almost feel the weight of my words heavy in the air between us. He fumbled for an explanation, but I wasn't interested in hearing his pathetic excuses. I stood up and walked out, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. I would find a lawyer who wouldn't just represent me but would help me dismantle Rebecca's world piece by piece. I needed someone who understood the stakes involved and could help me emerge victorious. I spent the next few days researching lawyers, looking for someone who specialized in divorce cases, particularly those involving infidelity. I scheduled consultations with a few, but nothing clicked until I met with a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Laura. She had an air of confidence that was contagious, and when I told her my story, I could see the gears turning in her mind. "Jake, you have a solid case here," she said. "We can leverage the affair against her. The fact that she cheated with your counselor, that's a whole new level of betrayal." I felt a rush of relief at her words. For the first time since this whole mess began, I felt empowered. Laura not only understood the emotional turmoil I was going through, she also knew how to turn it into a legal strategy. As we discussed the plan, I realized this was going to be more than just a divorce. It was going to be a battle. I would have to gather evidence, document everything, and make sure I was prepared for whatever Rebecca would throw at me. I was steeling myself for the fight of my life. I began documenting each encounter with Rebecca, noting her behavior, every excuse she made, and every lie she told. I even started taking screenshots of the texts I had found on her phone. I wanted to build a case that would leave her with no room for denial. Meanwhile, Rebecca continued to act like nothing was wrong. She had no idea that I was onto her. I played the part of the dutiful husband, attended family gatherings, shared meals, and pretended to be in a working on it phase. But inside, I was preparing for the inevitable fallout. One evening, I casually mentioned to her that I was thinking about going back to therapy on my own. "I just feel like I need to work on some personal issues," I said, keeping my tone light. She barely reacted, only nodding and saying that it was a good idea. Little did she know, I was already working with a lawyer who had a plan to ensure she'd pay for her treachery. I felt like I was living a double life. There was the facade of a loving husband, and then there was the vengeful warrior I had become in my heart. Each day, I was gathering strength, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash everything I had planned. As the days passed, I realized that it wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. The day of reckoning was approaching, and I was ready. The anger that had once consumed me began to morph into a sense of purpose. I was determined to come out on the other side not just intact but victorious. The day I filed for divorce was surreal. I woke up that morning with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The decision to move forward felt both liberating and terrifying. I was finally taking a stand for myself, but the reality of dismantling my life as I knew it loomed heavily over me. Rebecca had no idea what was coming. I arrived at Laura's office early, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. As I sat in the waiting area, I flipped through my notes, reviewing every detail I had collected over the past few weeks. I felt a strange calm wash over me. I was finally taking control of my narrative. When Laura called me into her office, I could see the determination reflected in her eyes. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, and I nodded, feeling a surge of adrenaline course through my veins. Remember, this is about you reclaiming your life. We're going to take the fight to her." We went through the paperwork, and as I signed my name on the divorce petition, I felt a sense of finality. It was done. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my power. Laura explained the next steps, and the way she laid out our strategy made me feel like I was finally in a position of strength. "Once we file, there will be a response from Rebecca," she explained. "Expect her to deny everything at first, but we have the evidence. We'll make sure she doesn't get away with this." As I left the office, I felt a mix of relief and trepidation. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that came with the looming confrontation. What would Rebecca's reaction be once she found out? Would she lash out in anger or try to manipulate the situation further? The next few days were tense. I tried to maintain my composure at home, acting as if everything was normal. Rebecca was blissfully unaware of what was brewing beneath the surface. I noticed her starting to act a little more affectionate, perhaps sensing the ice between us. She would touch my arm as she passed by or ask about my day, and I felt a wave of disgust wash over me. Did she really think I could just forget what she had done? Then the inevitable happened. I received the notification that the divorce papers had been served to Rebecca. I braced myself for her reaction. That evening, after I got home from work, I found her packing in the living room, the papers crumpled in her fist. "Jake, you can't be serious," she shouted, panic lacing her voice. "This is overreaction. We can work through this." I stood my ground, feeling the emotions bubbling up inside me, yet choosing to remain calm. "You made your choice, Rebecca. I'm not going to pretend everything is fine while you're out having an affair." She scoffed, her expression shifting from panic to anger. "You think you can just throw our entire life away because of some texts? It wasn't even serious." "Wasn't serious?" I shot back, my patience wearing thin. "You thought it was okay to betray me with the very person who was supposed to help our marriage. This isn't just some petty fight. This is about trust, and you destroyed it." Rebecca's face twisted in rage. "You're blowing this out of proportion. You're just jealous." Her words stung, but I refused to let them get to me. I had spent too much time analyzing her behavior, and now she was grasping at straws to shift the blame back to me. "This isn't about jealousy. It's about respect, and you have shown none for me or our marriage." She tried to backtrack, her voice rising in desperation. I was confused. I needed someone to talk to, and you weren't there for me. Anger surged through me, but I kept my voice steady. "You didn't need someone to talk to, you needed someone to cheat on me with. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." I turned to leave the room, but her voice stopped me. "So you're just going to throw everything away, our life, our friends, everything?" I turned back, my heart racing. "You did that when you chose to have an affair. I'm not going to play the victim anymore. I deserve better." Her eyes flashed with anger, but beneath it I saw a flicker of fear. Good. She was finally starting to grasp the reality of what she had done. As days turned into weeks, the divorce proceedings began to unfold. I had never imagined myself in such a position, but with Laura's guidance, I became adept at navigating the legal system. I felt like I was finally stepping into my own power, taking back control of my life piece by piece. Rebecca tried to play the victim through the process, claiming I was cold and unforgiving. She staged emotional scenes with friends and family, trying to garner sympathy. I had anticipated this, and I wasn't going to let her manipulation work. I learned quickly that the court system could be brutal, especially in cases involving infidelity. But I also learned that I had the upper hand. With Laura's help, we compiled evidence of Rebecca's affair, emphasizing the emotional toll it had taken on me. It was a painful process, reliving each moment of betrayal, but I knew it was necessary. Every time I walked into that courtroom, I felt a sense of purpose. I was there not just for myself, but also to ensure that Rebecca faced the consequences of her actions. I had spent years being the understanding husband, but now it was time to show the world the truth. The moment of reckoning was approaching, and I was ready to face her when the time came. I could feel the tension between us thickening, and I knew that this battle would not just be fought in the courtroom. It was personal, and I was determined to see it through to the end. As the court date approached, anxiety settled in like a heavy fog. The weeks leading up to the hearing felt like a countdown to the inevitable confrontation. Every time I sat in the courtroom, watching the intricate dance of lawyers and judges, I felt a mixture of power and vulnerability. This was it, the moment I would finally confront Rebecca and her betrayal head-on. The day of the hearing arrived, and the air was electric with tension. I dressed carefully, opting for a crisp suit that made me feel as put together as possible. I wanted to present myself as someone who had not only been wronged but who also had the strength to stand up and fight back. As I waited in the hallway, I could see other couples, some looking hopeful, others resigned. It was a bittersweet reminder of the lives that could have been. When I finally stepped into the courtroom, my heart raced. Rebecca was already there, sitting next to her lawyer, her expression a mix of defiance and anxiety. She caught my eye, and for a fleeting moment I felt a pang of sympathy for the woman I once loved. But that quickly dissipated as I remembered the betrayal. I took a deep breath and focused on why I was there. The proceedings began, and I listened as Laura laid out our case. She presented the evidence of the affair, including the texts I had collected, and how Dr. Collins had violated ethical boundaries by engaging with Rebecca. The judge listened intently, and I could feel the tension in the room as each piece of evidence was revealed. I was grateful to have Laura by my side. She was a fierce advocate, and her confidence bolstered my resolve. When it was Rebecca's turn to speak, I braced myself for the manipulation I knew was coming. She took the stand and began her testimony, painting herself as the victim of a loveless marriage, claiming that I had neglected her needs and emotions. She spoke with emotion, tears streaming down her face as she recounted how she had felt. Isolated and alone, my blood boiled as I heard her lies. I knew she was twisting the narrative, trying to rewrite our history to justify her actions, but I refused to let her fabrications go unchecked. Laura stood up to cross-examine her, and I could sense the shifting tides. "Rebecca, you claim that Jake neglected you," Laura began, her voice steady and sharp. "But can you explain why you decided to seek emotional support in the arms of another man instead of addressing those feelings with your husband?" Rebecca hesitated, her composure faltering. I didn't feel like I could talk to him about it. It was complicated," she stammered. "Complicated enough to have sex with your counselor," Laura pressed. "You chose to betray your husband instead of seeking help. Isn't that correct?" The tension in the courtroom thickened, and I could see Rebecca's bravado cracking. She shot me a desperate look, her eyes pleading, but I stood firm, refusing to back down. As the hearing progressed, I found my voice. I was called to the stand to provide my testimony, and I took a deep breath as I faced the judge and the room. The adrenaline surged through me, and I spoke openly about the pain of betrayal and the emotional scars it had left. "I trusted her with everything," I said, my voice steady despite the tumultuous emotions. "I never thought she'd choose to be with someone else, especially not with our counselor. I felt utterly betrayed." As I recounted the moments leading up to the discovery, the shock and heartbreak spilled out of me. I could see the judge's expression soften as I spoke, and I realized that sharing my truth was a powerful step in reclaiming my narrative. I wasn't just a victim. I was a man fighting for my dignity and future. When the hearing wrapped for the day, I felt exhausted but strangely liberated. I had faced Rebecca and her lies, and I had been honest about my pain. I could feel the emotional weight beginning to lift off my shoulders, even though I knew the fight wasn't over yet. That evening I returned home, my mind racing as I replayed the day in my head. I sat on the couch, staring at the wall, feeling the silence around me. It was strange to think that my relationship had come to this, but I was no longer willing to let her control the narrative of my life. I was done being the submissive husband who had overlooked her flaws for too long. Over the next few days, Rebecca's demeanor changed. Now that the hearing was underway, she seemed to enter a state of panic. She reached out to me multiple times, trying to manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. "Jake, I thought we could still work things out," she said, her voice dripping with feigned sincerity. "We don't have to let this go this far." I could hardly believe her audacity. "You had your chance, Rebecca," I replied, feeling a mixture of anger and pity. "You made your choice. Now you'll have to live with the consequences." This back and forth continued for days. She would text me, sometimes laced with apologies and other times with anger. Each message was a reminder of the betrayal I had endured and the woman I no longer recognized. I was determined to stay focused on the end goal, a divorce that would ensure I got my fair share of what we had built together while leaving her. With the consequences of her choices, the days turned into weeks, and as the next court date approached, I found myself becoming more resolute. I was ready for whatever was to come. With Laura by my side, I felt invincible, ready to take on the world. I was no longer just Jake, the hurt husband. I was Jake, the man who was taking back his life, one step at a time. Each confrontation fueled my desire for justice, and I was determined to see it through to the end. The next court date felt like the calm before the storm. I had spent hours preparing for what was to come, mentally rehearsing my statements and anticipating Rebecca's tactics. I knew she would likely try to pull out all the stops, but I was ready. The emotional turmoil that had once consumed me was now replaced by a steely resolve. I was determined to walk away from this chapter of my life, not only with my dignity intact, but also a better understanding of my own worth. As I entered the courtroom, I could sense the tension in the air. Rebecca sat with her lawyer, a smug expression plastered on her face that made my blood boil. She looked like she was ready for a fight, but I had come to the realization that I could only control my own actions. I wouldn't let her manipulate me any longer. The proceedings began, and Laura started laying out our case for the court. We had gathered more evidence, including statements from Dr. Collins that highlighted the unethical nature of his involvement with Rebecca during our counseling sessions. It was a powerful point that we knew would resonate with the judge. Rebecca's lawyer stood up to counter our claims, trying to paint me as the villain, someone who had neglected their marriage and forced Rebecca into the arms of someone else. I felt my anger flare as I listened to his words, but I kept my composure. I was no longer that passive husband who would take blame for everything. I was ready to stand up and fight for what I deserved. As the lawyer continued his argument, I felt a sense of clarity about the situation. I was no longer fighting for Rebecca or our past. I was fighting for my future. I wouldn't let her lies define me. When it was my turn to take the stand again, I felt a rush of adrenaline. I had rehearsed my statements and I was ready to confront her directly. "Rebecca," I said, locking eyes with her as I took my place in front of the judge. "You claimed I neglected you, but we both know that's not true. You were the one who chose to cheat rather than communicate your feelings. You had the opportunity to choose honesty, and instead, you chose betrayal." The courtroom was silent, and I could see Rebecca's facade cracking. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her expression a mix of anger and fear. I was finally calling her out for what she had done, and it felt empowering. Laura followed up with a series of questions that laid bare the inconsistencies in Rebecca's previous statements. "You've admitted to having emotional and physical relationships outside of your marriage. Given that you chose to act on those feelings instead of seeking help or communicating with Jake, how can you justify your actions?" Rebecca struggled to form a coherent response. "I was confused. I thought I needed someone who understood me, understood you, or someone who was willing cross ethical boundaries with you," Laura pressed. "You could have chosen honesty with Jake, but instead you chose deception. You were fully aware of what you were doing." I watched as Rebecca squirmed under the pressure, her bravado fading. It was a stark contrast to the confident woman I had known, and seeing her like this gave me a sense of satisfaction. I had finally taken back the narrative of my life. As the day progressed, we presented more evidence, and I could feel the tide turning in our favor. The judge listened carefully, and I sensed that the weight of Rebecca's actions was being acknowledged. Her lawyer's attempts to shift blame began to feel increasingly desperate, and I realized that our case was growing stronger by the minute. When the hearing concluded for the day, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I had faced Rebecca, expressed my truth, and had taken a stand for myself. The victory was small but significant, and I felt lighter as I left the courtroom. I was no longer just a passive observer in my own life. I was actively shaping my future. But the aftermath of the hearing wasn't without challenges. Rebecca continued to reach out to me, trying to manipulate the narrative. "Jake, please," she texted. "Can we just talk about this? I miss you. We can fix this." I couldn't believe her audacity. How could she still think I would fall for her games after everything? I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. When I finally did respond, I kept it short and firm. "There's nothing to fix. You made your choice." Her responses grew increasingly desperate. "You're making a huge mistake. You'll regret this." I felt a mix of anger and pity for her. It was clear she was struggling to face the consequences of her actions, but there was nothing I could do to save her from herself. I had to focus on my own healing, and that meant cutting ties for good. As the days turned into weeks, I continued to prepare for the final hearing. I met with Laura regularly, going over every detail to ensure we would be ready for whatever Rebecca threw at us. I felt a new sense of determination, and each day I grew more confident in my decision to move forward. The day of the final hearing arrived, and I felt a mixture of nerves and anticipation. I was ready to face Rebecca one last time in this battle for my future. The courtroom was packed, and as I walked in, I could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on me. But I also felt a sense of liberation. This was my chance to reclaim my life and move on from the pain. As the proceedings unfolded, I could sense that Rebecca was on the defensive. She was desperate, trying to cling to the story she had woven over the past few months. But with each piece of evidence Laura presented, it became increasingly clear that her deception would not hold up under scrutiny. When it was finally time for closing statements, I felt a rush of adrenaline as I took my place in front of the judge. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady. "I stand here today not just to seek a divorce but to reclaim my life. I've endured the pain of betrayal, and I refuse to allow Rebecca to manipulate the narrative any longer. I deserve a fresh start." As I spoke, I could feel the weight of my words resonating in the room. This was more than just a legal proceeding. It was an emotional release. I was finally severing the ties that had bound me to a past filled with lies and betrayal. With that, I stepped down, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. I had done everything I could to advocate for myself and my future. The outcome was out of my hands now, but I felt a sense of peace knowing that I had faced my truth head-on. The waiting period after the final hearing felt like an eternity. I left the courtroom that day with a mix of hope and dread. My life was about to change significantly, and while I was ready, the uncertainty of the outcome gnawed at me. I spent those days focusing on self-care, working out, spending time with friends, and rediscovering hobbies that had taken a backseat during my marriage. I was determined to rebuild my life, come what may. A few weeks later, I received the notification about the judge's ruling. As I opened the email, my heart raced. I skimmed through the document, my breath catching in my throat as I read that the judge had ruled in my favor. I had been awarded a fair division of our assets, along with alimony for several years due to Rebecca's infidelity. It was a bittersweet victory. While I was relieved to have secured my financial future, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness for the life that could have been. I knew that Rebecca would be devastated by the decision, and a part of me felt a pang of empathy. But the overwhelming emotion was one of liberation. I had fought for my dignity and had emerged victorious. I could finally begin to heal. The days turned to weeks, and as I settled into my new life, I found myself reflecting on the lessons I'd learned throughout this ordeal. I had entered the marriage believing that love could conquer all, but I had come to understand that trust and respect were equally paramount. I had trusted Rebecca implicitly, and she had shattered that trust. Yet, through it all, I discovered an inner strength I never knew I had. I chose to channel that strength into self-improvement. I enrolled in a cooking class, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I expanded my social circle, reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. I started working on my mental health, attending counseling to process the emotions tied to my marriage and divorce. With each passing day, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Eventually, I decided to reach out to Rebecca one last time. I wanted closure not for her but for me. I sent her a message, keeping it brief. "I hope you find what you're looking for in life. I wish you well." I knew she wouldn't respond, and that was okay. I didn't need closure from her. I needed closure for myself. As time went on, I started to think about the future. The idea of dating again had once seemed daunting, but I began to open myself up to the possibility. I joined a few dating apps, cautiously swiping through profiles, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I wasn't looking for anything serious at first. I just wanted to meet new people and enjoy life again. On one of those apps, I came across a woman named Sarah. We started chatting, and she seemed genuine and easy to talk to. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and before long, we decided to meet for coffee. The first time we met, I felt a spark I hadn't experienced in years. She was kind, funny, and had a warmth that instantly put me at ease. As we got to know each other better, I found myself opening up about my past, including my divorce. To my relief, Sarah didn't flinch at my honesty. She listened, showing empathy without judgment. It felt refreshing to be with someone who understood the importance of communication and trust. With Sarah, I felt a sense of hope returning, hope for love, for connection, and for a future that was entirely my own. I learned that it was okay to take risks again, to let someone in despite the scars of my past. Months passed and our relationship blossomed. I found myself smiling more often, laughing freely, and enjoying the simple things in life. Sarah never tried to replace Rebecca. She simply encouraged me to be the best version of myself. I realized that while my past had shaped me, it didn't have to define my future. Reflecting on everything that had happened, I understood that life had handed me a difficult lesson. Betrayal had hurt more than I could ever express, but it had also shown me what I was capable of. I had emerged from the wreckage stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. As I stood on the brink of a new chapter, I vowed never to forget the lessons learned through the pain. I had taken back my life, and I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. With Sarah by my side, I felt confident that I could face any challenge that came my way. In the end, I realized that the journey of healing was not just about revenge or moving on. It was about rediscovering who I was and what I truly wanted from life. I was grateful for the strength I had found within myself and for the new beginnings that awaited me. Life was too precious to waste on bitterness. It was time to live fully and love freely again.